Hi, I co-starred in the low-budget softcore porno The Spice Must Flow. Andrew, and this is Katie's Toys. I played the Sandworm. It was a non-speaking role. The set was very dry. Anyway, on today's MIA 80s Ladies, we're going to be looking at a character and frankly a franchise which, it didn't really gel too much with audiences. So we were kind of denied both in the end, despite being shown said character and it not being delivered. But let's just get right into Lady Jessica from 1984's Dune. Dune was a novel by famed science fiction writer Frank Herbert, which came out in 1965 and really is a cornerstone in science fiction and informed many other science fictions afterwards, including, for example, Star Wars, which will become important later. The story is a lot. It's about Paul, who was from the House Atreides, who, his family reluctantly took stewardship over a planet called Arrakis, better known as Dune, which was a barren wasteland, but was home to the only place for a spice called melange. It was, very integral to interstellar travel at that time. This whole book taking place so far in the future that, we'd sort of come back around to feudalism. And as part of, this stewardship of Arrakis, they got into a conflict with their blood enemies, House Harkonnen. And, during that battle, Paul became orphaned, essentially. His father was killed. He and his mother took off into the desert, where he became Space Jesus. It's a dense read. It's a big, long, dense read, and it makes it very difficult to adapt. Eh? Nevertheless, it was wildly popular. It still, more or less is. It is still very much a bedrock of modern-day science fiction. So many attempts had been made, some hilarious, some ridiculous, throughout the 70s for a film project for Dune. That said, once Star Wars came out, the game changed across the board for everyone, and a lot of studios, particularly Universal, said, "We got any Star Wars here?" And in fact, they did. They did have the rights to Dune, and they asked David Lynch, of all people, to just pump out a movie, but just one. David Lynch's Dune is a bit of a mixed bag. I will say, admittedly, the first half is pretty good, pretty faithful. They do what they can with what they got. I do understand that the film was actually much longer, probably deservedly so, and a lot of time and care was spent on world building, on getting the characters correct, on setting up the stage for the final conflict. It's really the second half of the movie. It just completely shits the bed. So not great. That said, Universal certainly was hoping this would be their Star Wars, and so they had the bed sheets, movie posters promising, this is going to be the biggest movie of 1984, and of course, action figures. It was LJN, later much more famous for their Thundercats line, that won the license for Dune, and they sort of, certainly took, let's say, inspiration from Star Wars with the, the size, the articulation, but importantly, they included their battle-matic action, which I have thoughts on that. We're not getting into it, but nevertheless, they they did what they could with the turd they received. So they had some vehicles, they had a big sandworm, they had the basic cast of the movie represented. That said, a lot of their marketing materials included Lady Jessica and Halle Gerg, who was Paul's teacher, and it's really kind of a strange thing. Almost like not quite unique, but certainly, an odd choice to include characters that you never either intended or weren't ready to be released to the wider public. I've commented before on mom action figures, which, maybe not every child was terribly interested in. But in terms of, women characters from Dune, there's no one bigger than Lady Jessica. I would argue, she was someone who was integral to the plot, there from the beginning, front to back, became very entwined in Paul Atreides' holy war. She's also a very interesting character in the sense that in this far off time frame, she was essentially Duke Atreides' concubine, which that her roles were quite obvious, but also as opposed to a wife and a queen, or a duchess rather, she was there to have babies for Paul. The difference here is that she was a little more unconventional. She and Leto Atreides fell in love. He never took a wife. And she was sent by the Bene Gesserit, a sisterhood that they were sort of really meddling with genetics over generations to produce their own kind of space Jesus. Lady Jessica was informed to have a daughter. She chose to have a son, thereby triggering Space Jesus, and really kind of playing by her own rules and defying her own sisterhood. So, very interesting character. And again, like no real spoilers, but she does become very prominent as a mother figure of her own sort of religious sect throughout the end. Again, there's a lot going on here, and in terms of the first female character for this line, she's it. Her figure looked pretty good. It was a bit of a mishmash. It was sort of her suit in the desert that was kind of colored a little more feminine, let's say, as opposed to what we saw on screen. She had her big, fancy hairdo. Very very cool figure, and it's one of those ones where it's really unfortunate they never made it to market, but there's a few things in the mix that might have stopped that. Again, when toy companies make toys based off of movies, they meet very early on, so they really don't know what the final product would be, what the final costumes, all that stuff is going to be. They really go off of art design first and foremost. Nevertheless, I mean, David Lynch's Dune was a bit of a mess from the start, and I do kind of wonder. There's no evidence here, but if LJN was like, let's not include the two old people in the first wave. We've already got a giant fat dude. We're taking a big gamble here as is, and perhaps they were correct. This thing, the movie was very heady. It did not exactly hit with fans. It didn't hit with non-fans. It didn't hit with kids, certainly. So I'm not sure who this was for. It definitely was not Star Wars, and definitely lingered on pegs for a long time. So whether Jessica was in the line or not didn't matter. This thing was just a clunker from the start. Had things been different, had they actually spread this out over 2 movies, or released a 3-hour movie, or something, anything to make this better, this could have gone better. This could have been a very expansive Star Wars-esque line. This could have been something. And of course, beyond Lady Jessica, there are other women and girl characters in the franchise. I think probably most importantly would be Paul's younger sister, who is creepy and mystical and very unnerving to watch, but very cool. Likewise, he had a wife played by Sean Young in the movie, Chani, who not a huge role in the books later on for sure, but they we'll come back to her in a minute. Nevertheless, and something I don't really get to talk about very often here is that often we will see catalogs, card backs, that kind of thing back in the day where they would show products we would never actually get. Unfortunately, this was very, very pre-internet, so we didn't know better. So the fact of the matter is, Patrick Stewart's character, Lady Jessica, they were sort of, seen a lot out in the wild, but not actually produced as toys, so it was a little misleading. This isn't unique. It's certainly one of the bigger examples. This would happen again with, say, LJN's own Thundercats line, and for me, personally, it hit with Playmates' Disney's TaleSpin line. They showed the entire collection on the back of the card, including vehicles, all of the characters, plus Wildcat, which they never actually made, and I'm still mad about it. The failure of the '84 movie really sort of pumped the brakes on any new Duneverse stuff, so companies really backed off until there was a sort of TV miniseries in 2000 called Frank Herbert's Dune. It's not great, but they had the time and the space, perhaps not the budget, to really look into it. So it's worth a watch. But I would say, of course, most importantly, is that we did finally get a proper 2-parter movie in 2021 and in 2024. The Dune and Dune Part 2 really much more faithful to the books. Again, despite being very long movies, and 2 of them no less. I mean, there's a lot they left out. There's a lot to be desired, but they really did, kind of cement Dune as the science fiction juggernaut that it is. This time, McFarlane Toys got the license, and I have made my piece with McFarlane Toys. They, of course, did a figure of Lady Jessica. They did one of Chani. They were not, despite being generally afraid of doing female figures for DC, they did at least do right here. Now, of course, these are not the the 1984 versions. These are the new 2020s versions. So we never did get that like Lady Jessica from David Lynch's movie. But at the very least, the character endured with Chani no less. So it's great to see in some form or another this finally get made. I mean, speaking of McFarlane and DC, It would have been a fun opportunity to have gone back and done a retro line for the '84 movie. I mean, it was a flop then, but like many terrible movies, it's sort of come back around. Maybe not in the camp category, but certainly, worth a second look and worth, it's a fun little watch as a, moment in time, as, as a first draft, as a first attempt at Dune. So McFarlane, it would have been fun at the time to do a retro line. They did not. I think the moment's passed. There is, of course, another Dune sequel coming soon. We'll see what comes with that. But nevertheless, great character, great franchise, a lot of bad missed opportunities, but it's a favorite of mine. And that'll about do it for Lady Jessica and Dune. I would like to thank you for watching, for liking, for commenting, all those YouTubey things. I would like to remind you that I might have been in a dark place when I played that sandworm, and I will see you next time on MIA 80s Ladies.